The rain streaked down my bedroom window like tears, blurring the streetlights into smears of gold against the dark. My duffel bag lay open on the bed, half packed with everything that still felt like mine. I could hear my mother's voice from downstairs, cold and final, seeping through the floorboards. "I won't have that under my roof." The words weren't shouted. That was worse. They were a statement of fact, like reading a weather report. This was simply the condition of things now. I zipped the bag closed. The sound was so small. Downstairs, the front door's deadbolt clicked shut, a solid, definitive sound that echoed through the silent house. It wasn't just locking me out for the night. It was locking me out of my life. I picked up the bag, my stomach a hard knot, and walked down the stairs. I didn't look back. I opened the door and stepped out into the rain, the wet chill immediate on my skin. I walked away from the warm light of the windows, from the childhood photos on the walls, from the woman who had been my mother. The pavement was slick and dark, leading me into a night that felt endless. The first night, I slept behind the 24-hour laundromat, curled between a dumpster and the brick wall for shelter from the wind. The hum of the dryers was a strange, mechanical lullaby. I didn't sleep. Every car door slam, every footstep on the wet pavement sent a jolt through me. I was 14, and the world had become a very large, very cold place. Hunger came next, a sharp, gnawing presence that overshadowed everything. The shame of digging through a dumpster behind a sub shop is a particular kind of cold. It settles in your bones, worse than the chill of the rain. You tell yourself you're just looking, but your fingers are trembling as you move aside soggy cardboard, hoping for something wrapped, something untouched. My stomach would clench, not just from hunger, but from the sheer degradation of it. I felt invisible, a ghost, haunting the edges of a world that was still turning normally for everyone else. That's where Maya found me, on the 5th day. I was trying to look casual, leaning against the dumpster, my heart hammering because I knew someone had thrown away half a sandwich earlier. She didn't approach like a threat. She just stood at a distance, a woman with kind eyes and a rainbow pin on her jacket. "Hey," she said, her voice calm. "You look like you could use a hot meal." I froze. Every instinct told me to run. Trust was a currency I couldn't afford, but her eyes held no pity, only a quiet understanding that disarmed me. She told me about a drop-in center, a place with no questions, just food and a shower. The walk there felt like a dream. The shower was the first real warmth I'd felt in days, the water washing away the grime and some of the shame. The hot meal, a simple bowl of stew and a piece of bread, was a feast. I ate slowly, savoring each bite, learning the first lesson of survival. Sometimes you have to trust just enough to take the next step, even if your hands are still shaking. The drop-in center led to the youth shelter, a temporary bed in a room with 3 other girls. Sanctuary wasn't quiet. It was the opposite. A constant, overwhelming noise of slamming doors, raised voices, the blare of a television someone always left on. It was the smell of bleach and cheap laundry detergent. My bed was a narrow cot with a thin mattress and a single gray blanket. I learned a new kind of vigilance. You kept your duffel bag with you always, or it might disappear. You slept with one eye open. But within that chaos, there was a thread of something else. The other kids. We were a collection of cast-offs, each with our own story whispered in the dark. A trans boy named Leo who'd been kicked out a year ago. A girl named Chloe who aged out of foster care. We were all LGBTQ+ in some way. That shared truth a silent bond that needed no explanation. We became a fragile, chosen family. We shared shampoo, warned each other about which staff member was in a bad mood, did our chores together, sweeping the common room, wiping down tables. The rules were strict. Curfew at 10, no guests, no drugs, no alcohol. The biggest rule, unspoken but understood, was to stay invisible when outside. Don't draw attention. Don't give them a reason to call the cops. In that cramped, noisy space, I found a bizarre kind of stability. It wasn't love, not yet. It was the comfort of not being alone, the relief of looking across the room and seeing someone who understood the hollow feeling in your stomach, the way a slammed door could make you flinch. We were broken pieces, but together we were less sharp. We could prop each other up. For the first time since the deadbolt clicked, I took a full breath. It didn't feel safe, not exactly, but it felt like a place to stop falling. The shelter's job board had a single index card, faded and curled at the edges. Dishwasher, cash daily. Ask for Maria. The diner was a 10-block walk, a place that smelled of old coffee and grilled onions. Maria was the cook, a woman with a permanent smear of flour on her cheek and eyes that missed nothing. She looked me up and down, taking in my too-clean second-hand clothes, the nervous way I held my hands. "You ever worked a pit before?" she asked, her voice raspy from years of shouting orders over the sizzle of the grill. I shook my head. "You'll learn," she said, and handed me a stiff, stained apron. The work was a special kind of hell. Steam billowed from the industrial sink, scalding my arms. My hands plunged into water so hot it turned my skin pink, wrestled greasy plates and crusted pans. The smell of old food and bleach soaked into my hair, my clothes, my skin. It was a smell I could never quite wash away, even under the shelter's weak shower. By the end of the first shift, my back ached and my hands were raw, blisters already forming on my palms. Maria counted out $40 and I crumpled bills into my hand at the end of the night. It was the first money I'd ever earned. It felt heavy, real. I started saving it in a yellow envelope I hid between my mattress and the bed frame at the shelter. Every day the blisters would break and reform, a cycle of pain that became a weird point of pride. The grease smell became my perfume. Maria watched me work, saying little. One Friday night, we got slammed after a football game. The dish pit was a mountain of chaos. I was drowning, my arms trembling with fatigue. Maria appeared in the doorway, wiping her hands on her towel. "You're slow," she stated, not unkindly. "But you don't quit. You want overtime? I'll pay you time and a half to help me prep for the morning." My heart leapt. It wasn't kindness, it was a transaction. She needed the help. I needed the cash. But it felt like a ladder being offered. I stayed until 2 a.m, chopping onions until I cried, scrubbing the grill until my arms felt like lead. She paid me $60. A week later, I walked to a discount store and bought a new pair of sneakers. The old ones had a hole in the sole that let the water in. Standing in the aisle, holding the box, I felt a surge of something powerful. It wasn't joy. It was agency. I had blistered for these. I had scrubbed and saved for them. They were entirely, completely mine. The alternative high school program was housed in a converted strip mall unit between a payday loan store and a nail salon. The air inside always smelled vaguely of acetone and despair. My guidance counselor from my old school had made the referral, her voice tight with pity over the phone. "It's for students with non-traditional circumstances," she'd said. I knew what that meant. Kids like me. The classrooms were overcrowded, the textbooks were tattered, and half the students looked as tired as I felt. The exhaustion was a physical weight, a fog I had to push through every single lesson. I'd fall asleep on the bus ride there, my head knocking against the cold window, and jerk awake at my stop. I studied during my breaks at the diner, hiding a textbook under the counter, vocabulary words swimming in my vision between washing pots. The fear was a constant companion. The fear that someone would find out I was homeless, that it would be written on my face, that it would give them another reason to look down on me. I perfected the art of deflection. I stayed at a friend's, became my answer for everything. Why I didn't have a permission slip signed, why I was carrying all my books, why I sometimes fell asleep in class. But there were teachers who saw through it. Mr. Evans, who taught history, let me eat my lunch in his empty classroom so I could study in peace. He never asked why. He'd just leave a granola bar on his desk for me. Ms. Garcia, my English teacher, saw something in my writing. She pulled me aside after class one day. "This is good," she said, pointing to a messy paragraph I'd scribbled about the laundromat. "It's raw. You have a voice. Use it." She gave me a stack of loose-leaf paper and told me to keep writing. Her belief was a tiny, fragile light in all that gray. Graduation day was held in the school's cramped parking lot, folding chairs set up on the asphalt. I stood there in a blue gown borrowed from the program's closet. It was too big in the shoulders and smelled like mothballs. They called my name. I walked across the makeshift stage, took the cardboard tube that held my diploma, and shook the principal's hand. There was no one in the audience for me, no one to cheer. I stood for a photo alone, squinting in the sun, holding that tube like it was a lifeline, because it was. It was proof. I had done it against all the odds. The ad was taped to the community college bulletin board, written in a purple ink. Roommate needed. Studio apt. Split 3 ways. LGBTQ+ friendly. I called the number, my voice shaking. Chloe from the shelter answered. She'd aged out and managed to get this place. It's a shithole, she said cheerfully. But it's ours. The studio was one room, really. A kitchenette in one corner, a bathroom off to the side, and the rest was just space. 3 mattresses on the floor defined our territories. Mine was by the window. The third roommate was Isabel, a friend of Chloe's from a GED program. She was quiet with nervous hands and a smile that took a long time to appear. We were a trinity of survival, learning to navigate the delicate dance of shared poverty. We cooked communal meals on a single hot plate, packets of ramen doctored with frozen vegetables, pots of beans and rice that lasted for days. We learned each other's rhythms, whose turn it was to buy toilet paper, who needed the quiet in the morning. The comfort was in the unspoken understanding. Coming home, and it was a home as sparse as it was, meant coming home to people who just got it. There were no explanations needed for the bad days, for the times when one of us would just stare at the wall, silent and hollowed out. We'd just make a cup of tea and leave it beside them. We didn't have a couch, so we'd pile blankets and pillows on the floor and watch movies on a tiny laptop, passing a single bag of popcorn between us. That first night, I fell asleep there, listening to the rhythm of their breathing in the dark, the sound of the city humming outside our window. I felt a feeling I hadn't known in years. Belonging. It was scratchy and imperfect, and built on a foundation of struggle. But it was real. It was the first taste of a stability I had built for myself, with my own blistered hands and chosen family. It wasn't much, but it was everything. The financial aid office was a maze of paperwork, each form a small test of my worth. I filled them out at the public library, my fingers leaving faint smudges on the applications. The questions about my parents' income felt like a trap. I wrote deceased because explaining was easier, the lie a small cold stone in my stomach. When the acceptance letter came, along with a work-study grant, I held the paper, and my hands wouldn't stop shaking. It wasn't just college. It was a key. The campus felt like another planet, all green lawns and students who carried the easy confidence of a life without panic. I felt like an imposter in my thrift store sweater, my lungs too tight. I kept my head down, moving from class to the library to my work-study job shelving books. The silence of the stacks was a different silence from the shelter. It was a silence full of possibility. That's where I found it. A whole section, tucked away on the 3rd floor. Queer literature, history, theory, books with words that described me, that named feelings I'd carried alone for years. I pulled one down, then another. I sat on the cold linoleum floor between the shelves, my backpack digging into my spine, and read. I read about Stonewall, about Audre Lorde, about lesbians who built communities in the face of everything. It was like breathing pure oxygen after years of suffocating. These weren't just stories, they were maps. My professors noticed the change. Dr. Ellis, who taught my Intro to Sociology class, saw me lingering after a lecture on structural inequality. "You have a perspective we need to hear," she said, and it wasn't empty praise. She became a mentor, pushing me to apply for scholarships, to speak up in class. My writing teacher, a sharp woman named Professor Chen, tore apart my first essay. "You're reporting," she said, her red pen hovering. "I want to feel it. Stop hiding." She was ruthless, and I loved her for it. I started finding my voice in those writing classes. I stopped writing about the laundromat as something that happened to me and started writing about the texture of the brick against my back, the specific smell of hot, damp clothing, the way the light from the machines painted shifting colors on the wet pavement. I wrote about Maya's rainbow pin, the exact weight of the $40 in my hand, the sound of 3 women breathing in a dark studio. The words became a way to shape the chaos, to make sense of the scars. And in that process, a fundamental truth settled deep into my bones, quiet and unshakable. I realized I wasn't broken. The shame I'd carried since my mother's ultimatum, the feeling of being wrong, of being a mistake, it began to dissolve. I was just different. My love wasn't a flaw. It was a fact. My survival wasn't a secret to be hidden. It was a history to be understood. The library floor, the harsh fluorescent lights, the smell of old paper, it became my cathedral. I was discovering myself, page by page, word by word, and the person I found was stronger than I ever could have imagined. The campus LGBTQ+ group met in a cramped student activities room that always smelled of stale pizza and optimism. I went free. The free food, my first few times, standing near the wall and shoving cookies into my pocket for later. I was still a ghost, good at observing, terrible at participating. Sarah was the one who noticed me. She was the social chair, all easy laughter and bright eyes, the kind of person who knew everyone's name. She wore her queerness like a favorite jacket, comfortable and bright. She brought me a paper plate of pizza one evening. "You always look like you're planning a great escape," she said, her smile teasing. I mumbled something, my face heating, but she stayed and she talked, and she didn't seem to mind that my answers were mostly nods. Our first kiss happened in her dorm room weeks later, after a movie night that was just the two of us. The room was small, lit by a single desk lamp, her roommate's side a chaotic explosion of clothes and textbooks. We were sitting on her bed, our knees touching, and the air felt thick with a nervous energy I didn't know how to navigate. She leaned in slowly, giving me every chance to pull away. Her kiss was soft, questioning, and something in me, some tightly wound coil of fear and expectation, just snapped. I kissed her back, and for the first time, it didn't feel like a rebellion or secret. It just felt like kissing. It felt like coming home to a place I'd never been. She taught me how to be loved without conditions. She didn't care about my thrift store clothes or my patchy history. She loved my intensity, my quietness, the way I noticed small details. She'd leave little notes in my textbooks. She'd hold my hand walking across campus, not caring who saw. It was a radical, terrifying, beautiful thing to be seen so completely. The breakup was my fault. Not because I didn't love her, but because I loved her too much through the lens of my own damage. I was so terrified of losing her that I became clingy, paranoid. I'd get quiet and sullen if she spent time with other friends. I needed constant reassurance that I was enough, that she wouldn't wake up one day and realize her mistake. I was trying to pour all my healing into her, making her my entire world, and it was too heavy a burden for anyone to carry. She ended it gently, sitting on that same bed where we'd first kissed. "I love you," she said, and her tears were real. "But I can't be your lifeline. You have to find that in yourself." The pain was a physical blow, a hollowing out. It felt like being thrown out all over again. But in the weeks that followed, lying on my mattress in the studio, listening to Chloe and Isabel move quietly around me, her words began to make a terrible, necessary sense. She wasn't rejecting me. She was loving me enough to let me go, to force me to stand on my own. I started to understand that healthy love isn't about clutching someone to keep from drowning. It's about two whole people choosing to swim together. The internship listing was pinned to the LGBTQ+ Center's bulletin board, a simple piece of paper that would change everything. Program intern, Horizon Foundation, support services for queer youth. My hands were sweating as I typed up my resume on the library computer. I listed the diner, the shelter volunteer work, my work study. I wrote a cover letter about wanting to be for someone else, what Maya had been for me. I didn't expect a callback. The interview was in a real office building with plants and quiet carpets. I wore my one pair of dress pants and a button-down shirt I'd borrowed from Isabel. The woman who interviewed me, Elena, had a calm energy and asked direct questions about my lived experience. I told her the truth, my voice only shaking a little. I told her about the laundromat, the shelter, the feeling of that first shower. I saw her eyes soften with recognition, not pity. I got the internship. It was unpaid, but my work study covered it. I started in the admin pool, answering phones, filing paperwork, making endless copies. I didn't care. I was in the room. I listened to the case managers talk about their clients. I learned the language of grants and outreach. I organized supply closets full of donated clothes and hygiene kits with a reverence others might not understand. I knew the exact weight of a good pair of socks. Elena noticed my work ethic, the way I never complained about the mundane tasks. She started giving me more responsibility, helping to organize a youth drop-in night, drafting social media posts for a fundraising drive. When a junior program coordinator position opened up, she encouraged me to apply. I was terrified, convinced I wasn't qualified. "You understand the kids in a way a degree can't teach," she told me. I got the job. The raise was small, but it was enough. I moved from admin to running my own small support group for homeless LGBTQ+ teens. I stood in front of them, these scared, tough, beautiful kids, and I saw my own reflection. I knew the look in their eyes, the guarded hope. I found my purpose there, in that circle of folding chairs. It was in handing a kid a bus pass and seeing their shoulders relax. It was in listening without judgment to a story I knew by heart. The pride I felt wasn't loud or boastful. It was a quiet, steady hum deep in my chest. I was doing the work. I was using my survival to help others survive. With the new salary, I could finally afford my own place. It was a studio apartment, smaller than the one I'd shared, with a noisy radiator and a view of another brick wall. But it was mine. I bought a real bed, not just a mattress on the floor. I put a plant on the windowsill. The first night I slept there alone, the silence was a gift. I had done it. I had financial independence. I had a career that meant something. I had built a life, brick by painful brick, and it was sturdy. It was mine. The first therapy session felt like walking into a stranger's house and being asked to take apart the foundation. The office was too warm, the couch too soft. Dr. Vance just sat there, her notepad resting on her knee, and waited. The silence was a challenge. I talked about the weather for 5 minutes before the words finally broke through. I started with the easy stuff, the diner, the shelter, the roommates, but she kept gently circling back to the rain-smeared window, to the click of the deadbolt. "What did you feel in that moment?" she'd ask, and my throat would close up. It took months to unpack the trauma of that rejection, to separate the fact of my mother's actions from the story I'd told myself about my own worth. I had woven her disapproval into my identity, a constant, silent soundtrack saying I was unlovable, wrong, a problem to be solved. Dr. Vance called it internalized homophobia, but to me, it just felt like truth. We chipped away at it, session by session. She had me write letters to my 14-year-old self that I never sent. I'd sit at my kitchen table, the pen feeling clumsy in my hand, and try to find words of comfort for that terrified girl with the duffel bag. It felt ridiculous at first. Then, one Tuesday, it didn't. I wrote, "You are not the thing she threw away. You are the person who survived it." The sentence stared back at me, simple and profound. I started to forgive myself for the shame, for the dumpster diving, for the ways I had to bend and break to survive. I hadn't been weak. I'd been resourceful. My identity wasn't a source of shame to be managed, but a core of strength that had carried me through. The love I had for women wasn't a flaw in my character. It was the bedrock of it. Embracing that truth was like finally taking a full, deep breath after years of living with a clenched diaphragm. The weight began to lift, not all at once, but in small, significant increments. I was learning to hold my own hand. 5 years. The anniversary of that rainy night came and went without fanfare. I marked it alone in my apartment, making a cup of tea and looking out at the brick wall. The sharp edges of the pain had dulled, sanded down by time and hard work, but the pull toward that house, that driveway, that door, remained. It was a quiet, persistent hum in my blood, a question that wouldn't stop asking itself. Closure wasn't about an apology I knew I'd never get. It was about standing on the other side of that door as the person I'd become, not the child she had thrown out. My friends didn't understand. Chloe, over cheap wine in my studio, argued fiercely. Why would you go back to that poison? She doesn't deserve to see you. You owe her nothing. Isabel was quieter, more worried. What if she hurts you all over again? They weren't wrong. The risk was real. But the need was deeper than logic. It was about rewriting the ending of that story for myself. I needed to see her, not for her sake, but for mine. To prove to that 14-year-old ghost, still living in my bones, that she couldn't hurt me anymore. The decision solidified one morning over coffee. It was just a certainty, calm and cold. I wasn't going back for a reunion, I was going back for a reckoning. A quiet one. I packed my car the next day with a strange sense of detachment. A bottle of water, my wallet, a single, small bag. The nervousness was there, a low thrum in my hands as I turned the key in the ignition, but it was overshadowed by a determined calm. The drive was a trip through a museum of my own past, the strip malls, the exits, the way the landscape slowly shifted from city sprawl to familiar suburbs. Each mile marker was a page turning backward. I didn't play music. I just drove. The silence in the car full of the echoes of everything that had happened since I'd last traveled this road. Soaked and terrified and alone. I was going back to the place where it all started, but I was bringing all of myself with me this time. Every scar, every triumph, every hard-won ounce of peace. I was no longer asking for a place under her roof. I was arriving to show her I had built my own. The suburban street looked exactly the same, preserved in some strange amber of middle-class permanence. The same manicured lawns, the same silent sedans and driveways, the same stillness that had always felt so suffocating. I parked my car a block down, under the shade of an old oak tree, and killed the engine. The sudden silence was a physical presence in the car, thick and heavy. My heart wasn't racing. It was beating a slow, deliberate rhythm against my ribs, a drum counting down. I watched the house from a distance, my hands resting on the steering wheel. I could see the front door, that same dark green door. The porch light was off. I noticed the garden first, the one my mother had always tended with such fierce precision. The roses were overgrown, tangled and wild, their blooms sparse and choked by weeds. The lawn was patchy, the edges blurred. It was a small thing, a detail most wouldn't notice, but to me it screamed. It was neglect. It was a life, untended. The image of her, always so perfectly in control, was subtly cracked. I took a deep breath, the air in the car feeling used up. This was it. The long walk up the same driveway I'd been thrown from. The concrete was familiar under my shoes, each step echoing with the memory of that rainy night. My legs carried me forward, my body moving with a steadiness my mind didn't quite feel. I reached the front door. The brass numbers were still slightly crooked. I didn't hesitate. I didn't ring the bell and run. I pressed the button with a finger that was completely steady, the chime echoing inside the house I'd once called home. The door opened, not with a swift pull, but slowly, cautiously, as if the person on the other side was afraid of what they might find. And then she was there. My mother. 5 years had carved new lines around her eyes, etched a deeper weariness into the set of her mouth. She was smaller than I remembered, her shoulders slightly stooped. She was holding a dish towel, her fingers worrying the fabric. For a long, suspended moment, there was only silence. Her eyes scanned my face, a quick, confused flicker, and then the recognition hit her. It wasn't a joyful dawn of understanding. It was a physical shock. Her breath caught in her throat, a tiny, sharp sound. Her hand flew to her mouth, the dish towel fluttering to the welcome mat. And then the tears came. Not a gentle welling, but an immediate, silent flood that streaked down her cheeks. She didn't speak. She just stood there, crying silently, her eyes locked on mine, drinking me in. I didn't speak either. I just let her look. Let her see the woman standing where her daughter had once stood. Let her take in the confidence in my posture, the calm in my gaze, the peace that had been so hard won and now resided deep in my bones. I saw her eyes travel over me, noting the quality of my coat, the cut of my hair, the lack of fear in my expression. I watched her see the life I had built without her. The unspoken apology was there, a desperate, aching thing in her wet eyes. It wasn't in words. It was in the tremble of her lip, the way her hands hung uselessly at her sides, the sheer, overwhelming weight of everything that had been broken between us. We just stood on the threshold, 5 years and a universe of pain stretching between us, and for that one long moment, words were impossible. They were also entirely unnecessary. I didn't step inside. The threshold felt like a necessary boundary, a line that had been drawn years ago and would not be crossed. I simply reached into the inner pocket of my jacket and pulled out a single, crisp business card. I held it out to her. Her eyes dropped from my face to the small rectangle of cardstock, her tears still falling silently. She read it slowly, her lips moving slightly as she formed the words, printed there. My name, and beneath it, the title. Director of Youth Outreach. Her breath hitched again. I didn't stop there. I pulled out my phone, my movements calm and deliberate, and opened the photos. I didn't hand it to her. I just turned the screen toward her. I swiped slowly through pictures of the kids from my support groups. Kids laughing at a pizza party, a serious-faced trans teen holding a new binder, a group of them standing proudly at a pride march. Kids who were safe, who were seen, who were thriving because of the work I did. The work I built from the ashes of what she had tried to destroy. The weight of it, the sheer, undeniable evidence of my life's purpose, seemed to crush the air from her lungs. Her hand, the one not holding the business card, began to tremble violently. She understood. The lesson was not in a shouted argument or a tearful reconciliation. It was in this quiet, devastating display. She had tried to extinguish me, to shove my identity into a dark corner and lock the door. And instead, I had taken that very identity and used it to become a beacon for others. I had built a life of meaning from the very things she had rejected. I saw the understanding dawn in her eyes, and with it, a profound, speechless shame. I didn't need to say a word. I had said everything. I put my phone away. I looked at her for one last second, this woman who was my mother, and I saw the full, crushing weight of her regret. And then I turned. And I walked back down the driveway, leaving her standing there in the open doorway, clutching that business card, completely and utterly speechless. I didn't step inside. The threshold felt like a necessary boundary, a line that had been drawn years ago and would not be crossed. I simply reached into the inner pocket of my jacket and pulled out a single, crisp business card. I held it out to her. Her eyes dropped from my face to the small rectangle of cardstock, her tears still falling silently. She read it slowly, her lips moving slightly as she formed the words printed there. My name, and beneath it, the title. Director of Youth Outreach. Her breath hitched again. I didn't stop there. I pulled out my phone, my movements calm and deliberate, and opened the photos. I didn't hand it to her. I just turned the screen toward her. I swiped slowly through pictures of the kids from my support groups. Kids laughing at a pizza party, a serious-faced trans teen holding a new binder, a group of them standing proudly at a pride march. Kids who were safe, who were seen, who were thriving because of the work I did. The work I built from the ashes of what she had tried to destroy. The weight of it, the sheer, undeniable evidence of my life's purpose, seemed to crush the air from her lungs. Her hand, the one not holding the business card, began to tremble violently. She understood. The lesson was not in a shouted argument or a tearful reconciliation. It was in this quiet, devastating display. She had tried to extinguish me, to shove my identity into a dark corner and lock the door. And instead, I had taken that very identity and used it to become a beacon for others. I had built a life of meaning from the very thing she had rejected. I saw the understanding dawn in her eyes, and with it, a profound, speechless shame. I didn't need to say a word. I'd said everything. I put my phone away. I looked at her for one last second, this woman who was my mother, and I saw the full, crushing weight of her regret. And then I turned. And I walked back down the driveway, leaving her standing there in the open doorway, clutching that business card, completely and utterly speechless. I got in my car and started the engine. I didn't look back at the house. I didn't need a dramatic goodbye. In my rearview mirror, I caught the briefest glimpse, a figure still standing on the porch, small and alone against the green door. Then I turned the corner, and she was gone. The closure was quiet. It settled over me not as a victory, but as a simple, solid fact. I knew with a certainty that reached into my bones that I finally had everything I needed. I had built it all myself. The road ahead looked different now. Not easier, but clearer. It was mine.